Greetings, campers, and welcome to today's webinar, the latest in our TELUS webinar series, AI for Artists, Safe Havens. I'm Scott Walker, Executive Director of the Canadian Artists Network, and like you, I am a working professional artist. Pleasure to welcome artists from right across Canada to the webinar today, and we would like to begin by acknowledging that we live, work, travel, and create on the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples who have cared for this land, now called Canada, since time immemorial. We acknowledge this as part of our covenant with all Indigenous nations to share, respect, and protect the land in the spirit of peace and friendship, and to honor the future generations of all our nations. So I want to start by playing you a sample of a recently created piece of music by someone named Eli Mercer.
There's no signal in the valley, but I'm finding who I am in the static and the shadows where the broken spirits land. No connection to the world above, but I'm learning how to stand. There's no signal in the valley, but I'm finally free again.
Okay, so you would be forgiven for not knowing who Eli Mercer is, and there's a good reason for that. He doesn't exist. Eli was fabricated by a music producer and YouTuber by the name of Rick Beato, and Rick freely admits that he did not actually do much to make that recording possible. He entered a few prompts in a few different sites, and AI concocted a fictitious singer, wrote him a song, and prepared the recording that we just heard. Actually, AI created 4 different recordings based on the same verses or the same lyrics that it created itself. Rick points out that AI was only able to do that because it is vacuuming up our music, our lyrics, and our vocals from existing material like ours and then regurgitating it. So, how do we protect our hard work from being repurposed, which is a nice way of saying stolen by AI? There are ways we can do that, and that's what today's session is all about. I'm sure the questions will occur to you as you listen to our presenter. Please put them in the Q&A box. And without further ado, let's welcome back our presenter, a strategy, marketing, communications, digital, and AI expert with 30 plus years of executive experience. And this is his 3rd time joining us to talk about AI. Welcome back, Lawrence Hallway.
Hi, Scott, and thanks everybody for the welcome back. As Scott alluded to, this is the 3rd webinar that I've done specifically on AI, and as most of you know, it's a wild, wild west out there right now, but just to take you back on a continuum. The first webinar, we talked a lot about we as artists, how do we move forward in the age of AI? And I think a lot of the context of that discussion was really around the need to embrace AI, not run in the other direction, and try to leverage some of the tools, the collaborative tools that are available to all of us. In the second webinar, we talked more about the litigation landscape. What's happening out there right now as it relates to patents and trademarks and copyrights? And what are some ways that some brands right now are considering protecting themselves? And then today, and Scott, if you'd be kind enough to pull up the presentation, we're going to talk a lot about the different resources and tools that we can use, all of us as artists, to be able to best protect ourselves. And just as a quick segue, I don't know if you saw it in the Globe and Mail report on business this morning, but there's a really interesting article that really talks about how some of the national newspapers, the Globe and a bunch of other newspapers, are suing OpenAI, mainly because OpenAI started scraping, as Scott alluded to, scrape content and news articles from the web, and then didn't provide any type of attribution back to any of the newspapers and the journalists that actually had done those articles, and additionally didn't compensate them for that. And so I think talking about this is completely appropriate and the right time. And so click to the next slide and we'll talk a little bit about why this is so important. And so in the last webinar, we did spend a lot of time talking about how AI currently works and how these GPTs and these bots right now start to ingest a lot of the work that we're creating as artists, whether it's different types of music, creative expressions, or different stylistic representations of our work. And so the conclusion from that is that we all face a lot of risks from these bots and these GPTs in terms of copying our work, scraping our work, reimagining our work without any type of attribution, with any credit back to us, without our consent, and without compensating us. And so there are some things that we can do to protect ourselves. And the overall message is for us to be proactive. On the next slide. And so how do we be proactive as artists? Well, there are things that we can do specifically around securing our rights. And I'll talk a lot about that today. If in fact there is a breach of our rights, how do we enforce our claims? And then finally, how do we leave, for lack of a better word, a digital paper trail or a digital vapor trail, so that if we are challenged, we can make sure that we preserve the ownership of our work. Next slide. And so here's a laundry list of some of the things that we're going to talk about today. The good news is there are a lot of resources available to us. These aren't bulletproof, but I think collectively, if we can try to embrace as many of these as possible, it'll put us in a much stronger position if ever we're breached. And breaches happen every day. So the first one is really about copyrighting your work. We'll spend some time on that in a moment. Secondly, there's things that we can do in terms of, for lack of a better word, digital fingerprints and embedding that in our work, in our music, in our creations. We can also publish explicit direction around who can use our work, how they can reproduce our work, and if they can reproduce our work. There's things that we can do that we talked about in the last webinar around trademarking or registering unique styles as it relates to the work that we create or brands that we're representing. The fifth point, which is really important, is creating and keeping evidence of ownership right from the very beginning when we start our work and the trail to completing our work. How do we keep some form of evidence or log that it is our work? And that's particularly important when we get challenged, if in fact by an AI, by a GPT or a bot, and they're claiming ownership over our work. Number six, we need to monitor the different databases that are out there right now, be proactive and check regularly to see if our work is being compromised in any way. 7, we need to enforce our rights if we're being breached. And then the last two are interesting for sure. There are some, what we would claim to be AI artist-friendly platforms that are out there right now. They're starting to grow. There's a fair number now, but the good news is it's becoming more robust every day. And they are trying to protect the rights of us as artists. And then finally, there's things that we can do where we can use organizations that collectively will represent our rights, or we can also use NFTs as well, non-fungible tokens, which have distributed ledgers. And they allow us to have a digital backlog of our work if we're ever challenged on it. So we'll start with the first one on the next slide, which is copywriting our work. And so why would we consider copywriting our work? And to me, this is low-hanging fruit. It does provide exclusive rights, like very directional around those that would want to reproduce, display, license, or create the derivatives of our work. So we can sort of set what I would call freedom within a framework. What are we allowing or enabling others to do with our work? So what do we need to be able to do that? Well, for painters, photographers, and visual artists, we need to register the original copy of our work with either the Canadian Intellectual Property Office or the US Copyright Office. We need to make sure that we provide a lot of high-resolution images along with titles and dates so that our work is labeled properly. And then if we're registering a whole series of work that we've done, if we can do it as a collection, it improves our opportunity to copyright it. Next slide. For musicians and music producers, it's a little bit different. We can take the sound recordings and copyright those or copyright the compositions. Also doing that through SOCAN or the US Copyright Office. And there are similar bodies in the UK as well that we can use. So the Association of Composers, Songwriters, and Music Producers. And then keeping timestamps of our original project files. So our digital audio workstations, our sheet music, those are all really important factoids that are required should we ever be challenged on a copyright. And then a few examples of this that I put in is if you upload a song to SoundCloud, you need to register it in advance of having it uploaded. Otherwise, your copyright rights will be jeopardized. And then without registration, it puts you in a compromised position where you can't really pursue any litigation type issues. So it's really important that as the first step that our work is copyrighted. Next slide. The second thing, which is really important for us to do, are some form of a digital fingerprint or watermark embedded in our work. And so why would we want to consider doing this? Well, it's easy if an AI output, a bot or a GPT were to scrape the web and take some of our work, if in fact we challenge it, then if our digital fingerprint is embedded in the work, then it's easily identifiable and attributed back to us. That's why it's most important. And so in terms of what to do for visual artists, you embed these invisible watermarks. And there are tools that enable us to do it. I've used a couple of them. Adobe Photoshop, which I know a lot of you are familiar with, is really good at doing this. And the important thing is to be able to put your digital signature in place as well. And so that if in fact you do get challenged, you've got some representation to be able to go back and challenge some of the AI bots. Next slide. For musicians, a little bit different. There are some services like Audible Magic, Shazam, and in there you can also include audio fingerprints that are unique and distinct so that you're able to track your work back. An example again would be a watermark in an image can later prove unauthorized AI use in generative model databases. So there are databases like Leon, which has over 5 billion pieces of data, or Midjourney, that actually scrape the web without getting consent. And so they do that on a regular basis. So the good news is if you're proactive and you go out and you check into these databases regularly and you see your work and there is one of your digital watermarks in place, then you can easily prove that the work was yours, and it's much easier from a litigation standpoint. Next slide. Excuse me. Third thing is around exclusive usage licenses. So these are licenses that specifically clarify the rights of use, and starting to show up a lot more on some of the AI platforms I've noticed, where when work is scraped, it actually will specifically indicate the type of usage that's required. And so what you need to do is post your work on your website with a license that specifically says all rights reserved, not for use in AI training or machine learning systems, or you can have some liberties around what can be used. Or you can use Creative Commons with restrictions. And then I do have some colleagues that are using robot text files now, and these actually are pretty effective. They're not 100% bulletproof, but they do trick the bots, so they'll skip over your work, and it doesn't enable them to easily scrape it into their machines effectively. And so here's some examples you can see on how you can use robot text files to be able to do that. I haven't used it myself, but I do have some colleagues that have. Next slide. Pardon me. We can also trademark unique styles of brands, and we talked a little bit about this in the last webinar. And so if there's a distinctive style, logo, brand name, visual identity to any of the work that you're doing, in all likelihood, if it is distinct, you can seek trademark protection. And so to be able to do that, you need to register name, logo, or the collection that you created, name as a trademark. And you can do that through the US Property and Trademark Office, the Canadian Intellectual Property Office, or the World Intellectual Property Office, depending on what geographic residence you want to do it in. And really what that does is it does stop others from really taking claim to your work. And so there are a lot of examples of this. There's some litigation in place right now that's helping to protect trademarks. And so this significantly strengthens that case. Next slide. Pardon me. I talked a little bit about this at the outset. Another really important thing to do, and you always think of a worst case scenario, if in fact we are challenged and our work does get stolen or wrongly attributed, it's really about keeping evidence of ownership right from the very beginning. And so this is really, really important. So the first thing that would be really important to do is maintaining the original creation files. So depending on how you created them, that's really important. So whether it's digital audio workstations, or sketches, drafts, notes, initial creative concepts, Illustrator files, keep a record of those, embed those digitally for yourself so that if you're challenged, you can provide a digital paper trail. And then timestamping is really important because it does provide proof of existence, which is really important, again, if we're challenged. And so there's a number of different tools that are available to help us from that standpoint. Vaulty uses blockchain and AI to create secure digital signatures. That's a very popular and strong one that's being used right now. There's also Arweave, which actually is really decentralized blockchains, which allows you to store your art as data and again, provide a digital paper trail if challenged. And so these are all really easy, good examples that can be used to try to create evidence of ownership. Next slide. This is really important as well. And I talked at the beginning about, we can be our own best advocate, and all of us as artists have to be exceedingly proactive. You can't monitor every database, but some of the larger ones like Leon 5B and Common Crawl are ones that are used all the time, which non-authorized, I shall say, will scrape work off the web. And so I go on them every once in a while just to see what's on there. And you'd be amazed at how much data they pull. But there are tools you can use to help support this. HaveIBeenTrained.com, I've used that before, which helps you search for work that could be replicated off of yours. There's Glaze or Nightshade, which are really good tools that if you produce your original work and you want to distort it somewhat, then when the AI bot tries to scrape your work, it won't scrape the original version of your work. It'll look like a reincarnation, a blurred version, or a different standard deviation of your work. So it's not really focused on the original artwork, which provides some benefits back to all of us. So it protects our original work. And so those are tools that we can use proactively as we're searching different databases. If in fact we want to protect our work, there's either through a digital signature or using Glaze to or Nightshade to adjust our work, then it will protect it from the originals being scraped by some of these bots. Next slide. And then there's enforcing our rights. So if we are breached in any way, and there's a lot of cases of it right now from an attribution standpoint, it's not enough to just register our work. There's things that we can do to make it a lot more impactful for those that are breaching our rights. So there is a Digital Millennium Copyright Act. That's what DMCA is, which you can actually send notices to. So you would notify them through email or otherwise and give them all the information around who scraped your work, what was scraped specifically, has been put out through social media platforms, and they will help protect us. You can file specific legal claims. It does start to get a little expensive, and I'll talk about how much each of these things cost a little bit later in the webinar. But you can, in the US, there's copyright infringement laws. You've got to register your work first, but they'll protect us. Similarly, in Canada, copyright automatically exists. We can still sue, but those are things that we can do. And then, of course, joint class action lawsuits or coalitions that work together. Pardon me, I talked a little bit about this in the earlier webinar, I think it was webinar number 2, about Getty Images, who feel they've been breached by Stability AI, where it's scraping all of their images, and Getty is taking them to task, and they're going to win. It'll be a pretty significant lawsuit that I think will set precedent. And then similarly, the artist versus Midjourney and Stable Diffusion. I think the artists are going to win that one as well. And all these become precedential for us to be able to draw on as the legal framework starts to tighten around protecting us as artists. Next slide. And there are some artist-friendly platforms. Again, there are more unfriendly than friendly, to be completely transparent, but this seems to be growing and growing expeditiously. And so essentially what we need to do is protect our work in such a way so that the platforms that aren't artist-friendly can't upload our work. That's really, really important. So there are other alternatives that we can have our work uploaded to that will respect our rights in terms of attribution, compensation. A few of them that I've used are, there's one called ArtStation, Folio.pro, I'm sure a few of you have used, or Glass. So these are just examples of some of the platforms where we can't post our work, and then attribution directly back to us in terms of rights and compensation will be enabled. Next slide. And then there's strength in numbers. So I talked a little bit about different platforms that are available to us if we want to go the extra distance and protect our work. So collective rights management. So these are organizations where they will take our work and ensure that there's proper attribution and compensation back for us if in fact one of these AI, a GPT or a bot wants to use our work. So it's almost like having a collective that would represent us as artists as a group. And they are becoming much more powerful. So that's one thing. You can register your work with them and they will totally represent you. And then there's NFTs that I talked a little bit about earlier. So non-fungible tokens. So these are unique digital assets that are in distributed ledgers. So they're represented on a blockchain. And so when you track back the blockchain, there's unequivocal proof on in terms of who the work belongs to. And so it's a pretty powerful digital footprint, which I think would very strongly hold up if there's any litigation around challenges to any of our work. Next slide. So in summary, there's lots of steps we can do to be able to protect ourselves. The number one message for all of us is be proactive. All of these things have to be initiated by each of us, from registering and copyrighting our work, right through to figuring out which platforms that we want to use collectively. I'll give you a sense on the next slide around the costs associated for some of these things. If we can go to the next one, Scott. I think this question came up, if I'm not mistaken, in the second webinar or the first webinar I did, but I did promise I'd come back with a range around. So what does it cost for some of these things? So each of the tools that we can use, collaborative tools, all have different rate cards, but in terms of things we can do to protect ourselves. So in the first tranche, we're trying to stay under $100 annually, which I would classify as being low budget. Things like registering our work, we can do that for free in Canada. Copyright notices and AI licensing language we can put into all our work. That doesn't really cost a whole lot. Using free tools like havebeentrained.com, which, as I mentioned, I have used, or Glaze, they help to protect our work. Robot text to block some of these AI scrapers, and then timestamping our work using blockchain tools. Those are all relatively cheap. I think even under $50. If we want to be a little bit more proactive, it does get a little more costly, but I personally think it's well worth it. So registering with US copyrights, I know in Canada it's free, but that's important if you want to ensure that you've got at least North American protection. Using some of the tools that are available, either Adobe or Digimarc for watermarking purposes, joining artist-friendly platforms. In some cases, there are small fees associated with it because they'll represent us. And then filing takedowns with the DMAC, as I mentioned before, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. There are costs associated with it, but again, depending on the type of work that you're doing, it could be well worth it. And then when we get on to more, I would say, the full, little more costly side, not bulletproof, but pretty strong protection on top of what I talked about before. It's registering all core works as trademark, using a paid watermarking service to represent us, hiring a lawyer. As I mentioned to Scott, both my brothers are lawyers. One of them does a lot of work in this area, and so it's not cheap. And so there's lots of things we can do not to have to hire a lawyer. And then, as I mentioned, enrolling in some of these collective groups that will represent us together, and or leveraging NFTs. But again, full range from zero to thousands of dollars. But I think there's a lot we can do that for us that are very budget conscious. And so on that note, I'll hand it back to Scott to see if there's any questions.
Well, surprise, surprise, Lauren, there are questions. So why don't we get to them now? I've one that kind of popped up in the chat, and I think it's worth, you kind of alluded to it a few seconds ago. Why, if you're a Canadian artist, register in the United States with the U.S. Copyright Department?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the biggest issue is that if some of your work is scraped through some of these bots or GPTs, and in fact, someone in the US ends up leveraging that work, I think it just offers another line of protection. Even though the work is resident in Canada, as you know, in a lot of cases, it's almost like a borderless society with digital today. And so I strongly advise any of my peers and colleagues when we're producing work that at minimum we register in Canada, go the extra distance. It's not that much more money, and just register it in the US as well. Canada's free, but that's the real reason why, because you need that extra layer of protection.
And just in terms of cost, because I've done this for songs that I've written, is that registering a song, I can't speak to any other type of creation, but a song is less than $100. So it's not that much to register. Can an actor copyright their physical/facial image, and can they protect themselves from AI using their work and material owned by others?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. So the answer in theory is yes, because it sort of falls under this uniqueness of a brand or creation. So if it's distinct, and this is one of the areas where I think we're going to see a lot of challenges on the litigation side, because there's new tools, and Scott, you and I were talking about it earlier today, even tools that Google just released, like Nano and Banana, which we can share after this session with your members, where it takes your image, or takes an image, and you can distort the image and still claim it's yours. Change the clothes, change the hue of your face, change the eye color, change the dexterity of your ears or your forehead. And so I think as AI advances, there's going to be tighter controls around this, but the short answer is yes, you absolutely can protect your own image.
And a question about protecting the work of actors, theater directors, choreographers. How do they protect their work?
Oh, that's really interesting. So, so for choreographers, I don't know specifically. I think I'm going to take that one away and ask what my brothers around that one. But more specifically and intuitively, I would think, if there are some forms of transcript that represent the choreography, you talked about keeping a footprint, a digital footprint of the work. And so whether you're writing a screenplay or you're directing dancers, I think somehow having that articulated in a form that's protectable, in some form of a digital asset, and either putting it into an NFT and or through a digital workstation, I think that would be the proof that you would require. But I will take that one away, and I'll ask a little bit more definitively around how that would work. It's a very interesting question.
Question about the CIPA listing a $64 price for registering copyright.
What's the question on that specifically?
Well, just you had mentioned that it's free to register copyright in Canada, but this would suggest that there is actually a cost.
Oh, I didn't know, because when I've done it in the past, it was free, unless they've more recently, maybe there's a different tier of registration. I can check that. I do know in Canada, it generally is free for very basic trademark and registration.
Okay.
They may have changed it recently, or they may have added a tier.
Right. Someone asked ahead of time about if you post something on Facebook, is that just open game as far as AI is concerned?
Yeah, it is, unfortunately. It'll be interesting to see what Meta does with Facebook and Instagram, and quite frankly with TikTok and all of the social platforms, because that's where it's a little scary. It can become the wild, wild west. I think that's harder to challenge. That's why if you look for forums where they specifically have rules around protecting us as artists, around any of the work that we create, otherwise, it's fully liberated. That's the issue. So there's not as much protection, obviously, if you go through social platforms.
Can someone protect original videos that they've already posted on YouTube of their work or from their own website? Or do you put in a disclaimer like you referenced?
I would do both. So the answer is yes, you can still protect it. Again, depending on what you did, I would go and register it right away. If you haven't registered it already, it's never too late if it's your work. And then absolutely put disclaimers in there, and as well try to put in some watermarks or digital fingerprints as well. Like any of the tools that we talked about earlier today, it's never too late. Unless you see your work already being commoditized across a number of different platforms. It's a little harder if the horse is already out of the barn, but you still do have recourse. It just gets a little bit more expensive to protect yourself.
A couple of questions that just came in. Are artists protected to a certain extent by photographing their artworks as they develop them?
Yes, that would be part of the repository or keeping a digital paper trail. So all those things absolutely help in the event that your work is wrongly attributed to somebody else. So the answer is yes, definitely.
And is Vimeo better than YouTube to post your music videos, say, to?
Oh, you know what? I don't know if it's better. I don't know. Scott, would you have a point of view on that? I know you post sometimes.
I do not.
Oh,
I do not have a point of view on that.
oh.
I probably
I'm not
should.
sure. Yeah, you know what? I'm not sure. I'm familiar with both, but I just don't know specifically whether one is better than the other.
I think one is more exclusive than the other. I think Vimeo is not, I'm guessing, I'm not sure about this, but I suspect there are fewer cat videos on Vimeo.
Yeah, you're probably right.
You know, so it's not as widely used, and therefore it's more for professionals, but I don't think that protects us necessarily
Yeah.
from AI.
Yeah.
Here is a point. I'm reading Empire of AI by Karen Howe right now. What books do you recommend for people who are not techies?
Oh, you know what? I can send you a bunch. So I have again, great question. So I have a few books and or courses that I've actually either read or that I've gone through that I thought were actually quite good for folks that are newly interested in AI. So Scott, I will send you a list afterwards for
Great.
sure for your members. Yeah, no, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you, Lauren, and I will forward them to everybody.
Yeah, there's lots of good stuff out there right now, but I've read a lot of it, but there are some that are much better than others. Explaining it in common language, which I think would be really good.
Yeah, for sure. So here's the question. I'm concerned about the amount of energy, fossil fuels, needed to generate the data centers to keep AI going. Are there ways that an artist can be proactive in this? For example, avoiding the use of AI, like Google automatically posts an AI answer to a question.
Yeah, the energy concern is a big one. I think that's the elephant in the room with AI, to be quite candid. You don't see a lot of content around it right now, but it's going to become a real problem. I don't have a good answer for that. I've thought about that myself because it is going to become a real issue. Energy management, and you know, that happened with farming a while ago when everyone was doing digital farming earlier around pre-AI, but just I think the concern right now is the amount of energy that's burnt up through some of these GPTs and otherwise, and I think that's being looked at. I don't have a good answer. I've read a lot about it and I've thought a lot about it, but right now I don't know what the recourse is to be completely candid.
Okay, well, there are so many questions out there right now because this is still a relatively new phenomenon, and the ramifications and the implications are still being discovered and thought about and pondered and worried about, as we all are. So this is a whole new world, isn't it, Lauren?
It really is. And Scott, you know, it's interesting. More and more of these litigation cases are starting to appear in mainstream media. So I think the volume of these things is starting to be turned up. To me, that's good news. As the public becomes more aware of the risks associated with all of these things to us as artists, and then as your member rightfully asked, even things like the impact on the environment with using more energy to be able to fuel these chatbots, these GPTs, and these scraping algorithms, I do think it's going to start to turn the tables around governance and management, and I actually think we're going to be all far better off. But to the comment you raised, it's changing so quickly and it's moving so quickly that I think it's going to be a really interesting journey over the next 2 to 3 years for sure.
You got that right. So I think we're done, Lauren. And
All right.
once again, I thank you for your expertise and for making it available to us. It's been great.
Hey, thanks, Scott. And to all your members, thank you very much for having me. And I hope everybody has a great rest of the week.
Thank you. Thank you, Lauren Solway. Thank you to our series sponsor, TELUS. And most of all, thank you for being here today. We will be posting the video of this webinar on our website early next week, along with a downloadable file of Lauren's slides. So you'll be able to access that probably by Tuesday at the latest. And don't forget that all of our webinars, public relations, art and neuroscience, preserving the mind, copyright, social media, artistic legacy preparation, identity theft, fraud prevention, and the full AI series are available on our webinar. And we're going to be presenting a webinar across, with the Canada Council this fall on their new application system. So we'll let you know when that's coming up. You can find out all details on our website, which is canartnet.ca. So until we meet again, be well, take care, and have a creative day. Thank you.